this is without a doubt one of the best acted shows I have ever seen. Every single character is so compelling and complex. They are constantly changing who you are rooting for in the show, and if even one performance is subpar, it could have brought the entire thing down. They all have an important part to play, and every single inter-character relationship is interesting, even if they only share one scene together. Let's talk about Oz's rival, Sofia Falcone, who is the perfect foil for Oz, and for some of us, myself included, she actually ends up becoming the character that you are rooting for by the end of the show. Kristen Milioti is an absolute powerhouse. I had seen her in other stuff prior to this, and I've always liked her, but until I saw this show, I did not know just how great she actually is. She goes toe-to-toe with an excellent Colin Farrell in every single scene, and dare I even say, outshines him sometimes. That's just how good she is. I love how we don't get the full story on Sofia until about halfway into the season. The show kind of manipulates us into thinking that she might be this crazy woman. They kind of play into the crazy woman stereotype. However, she was very innocent as someone could be who was born into a crime family and did not do anything wrong, was framed by Oz for something that her father, Carmine Falcone, did. She wasn't a monster until Arkham turned her into one. They made her a monster. Even when she came out, she was fairly restrained, but her family, trying to push her out, finally pushed her over the edge. The gas scene is where that all came to a head when she finally went off and rid herself of her entire family that refused to help her when she was in Arkham. Such a brilliant scene, her dancing around while she was doing it, the music playing, just perfect. The fire scene in the last episode is also great, lighting up the 3 cigarettes and throwing one of them onto there, and the expressions on her face. God, she nailed this role. I also love that she kept Johnny Vitti alive just long enough to gather the troops, only to kill him in front of everyone. What a brilliant power play that was, and it was incredibly satisfying to me as someone who absolutely hated Johnny Vitti from the opening scene. But even after all of this, she still had a conscience. She was still very conflicted, and she was still very hesitant to run Carmine's empire. She could have gotten away scot-free and lived a better life for herself, but she could not let go of her need for revenge on Oz. After all, he did kill the one person that actually genuinely cared about Sofia and tried to help her in her brother, Alberto Falcone. It honestly felt kind of similar to Neil from Heat, not being willing to leave without going back to kill Waingro, not being able to let it go. Characters being unwilling to let things go is a running theme throughout this series. Sofia's constant cat and mouse game with Oz is incredibly compelling. They are both constantly trying to outsmart and one-up each other, and they keep going back and forth as to who gains the upper hand, and that thread continues all the way up until the very last episode when Sofia thinks that she finally has Oz dead to rights, but she once again underestimated him and his ability to manipulate people. He uses his background and grittiness to his advantage to relate to the underlings of the bosses and get them to turn on all of the bosses. He's not really a man of the people. He knows that. Sofia knows that. The audience knows that. But he knows how to play into it. Hardly anything Oz says is true. He is a world-class liar. He was willing to let his mom get her finger chopped off to protect the lie about his brothers that she already knew about, but he knows how to tell people exactly what they want to hear. I never really thought that he was going to kill her. She's just too good of a character. Plus, there were some leaks, I'm not sure if they're true or not, about her possibly having a fairly large role in the Batman 2. However, that does not take away from how good and memorable that scene is. From the car ride to the stop to him potentially killing her and then actually ending up turning her over to the authorities. It was the perfect culmination for both of their arcs in the show. The dialogue was so good, and they were both at the absolute top of their game. They both have really good points and simultaneously call each other out on their BS. Sofia grew up rich. She was spoiled. She was privileged, but she got totally screwed over by Oz and her dad. Oz is someone who grew up poor and had to work for what he had and did what he had to, but he is also completely lying about being a man of the people. He will say whatever he needs to get on top and get himself power. Both characters are complex. They have things that we like about them and things that we dislike about them. Once again, nothing is black and white. Eve's scene with Sofia is one of my personal favorites in the entire show. They have a really nice back and forth. You are so sure that Eve is going to die, but they subvert your expectations like they do throughout the entire show. Despite these two characters coming from wildly different backgrounds, Eve grew up poor and Sofia grew up with a silver spoon in her mouth. They relate to each other's experiences as women, and Sofia was willing to let Eve live despite not getting any information from her, and then Eve tells her the information. So they do end up bonding in a way. Eve gives her a chance, one of the many fantastic subversions of expectations that the show masterfully pulls off. There are so many interesting parallels and dichotomies in this show. Oz totally screwed Sofia over, but she was born with a silver spoon in her mouth and never truly knew hardship. Oz was born into poverty, a dog-eat-dog world, and did what he felt was necessary to get what he deserves. But Sofia is also a woman and becomes an easy scapegoat for the men in power to discard. She empathizes with and relates to Eve's struggle as a woman and spares her because of that, and Eve helps her, despite those two having very different backgrounds. Eve having a background that was much more similar to Oz's than Sofia's. Oz and Sofia both face serious generational trauma, but in very different ways. While Frances was not willing to let Oz go, despite knowing what he did to her sons, Carmine threw Sofia under the bus at his first opportunity to protect his own ass for something that he did, not her. However, both of those actions were taken for selfish reasons, so they aren't too dissimilar, and both of these characters, Carmine and Frances, imposed unreasonable and unfair expectations onto their kids. Carmine wanted Sofia to take over the empire, even though she probably wouldn't be cut out for it and doesn't seem like the person to run a criminal empire. Frances puts all of the pressure on Oz to become rich and powerful to give her the life that she always wanted. Parental expectations and generational trauma are huge themes throughout this show. Of course, there is another key difference here in that despite the fact that Oz was a kid at the time, he did originally make the promise to Frances to get her everything that she wanted, and that ended up saving his life. Whereas Sofia taking over was always Carmine's idea. And it seemed, at least to me, that Sofia didn't fully understand what taking over the family business actually meant, or she didn't want to fully understand it. But the parallels here are undeniable, and it is so fascinating to compare and contrast the experiences that these different characters have. But for me, what I really want out of a movie or show is to feel something. And a show like this, where basically everyone is a criminal, could have easily felt completely cold and disconnected, and it is anything but. You feel for Sofia being completely screwed over by everyone that she thought she could trust, everyone she thought were family, and being forced to endure 10 horrible years of torture at Arkham. How can you not feel for someone at that point? That was devastating. That was the point in the show where I started rooting for her, and I am still firmly Team Sofia. Get your revenge, girl. I hope it happens. I really liked the Selina Kyle letter. I thought that was a nice touch. Another just little tease for the future that came in a very organic way. And I freaked out for a second when they said half-sister, but then I remembered back to the Batman that, oh, yeah, Selina is actually Carmine's daughter. So that would be very interesting to see those two team up in the future. They certainly have a lot of things in common, even though, again, like I talked about for some other characters in the show, they definitely have very different upbringings as far as money, but they certainly have a lot of horrible experiences with men, especially with Carmine, so I cannot wait to see what those two will do together in the future.